This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, South Africa's all-share index was down today almost 3%, its lowest since mid-June. Now, traders are saying investors are becoming increasingly worried about the momentum in the economic recovery. Market heavyweight Naspers dropped for a fourth straight session, down 1.9%, as of course Tencent declined in Hong Kong. Now, the mining index was down also 1.6%. The banking index dropped for a third day, down 3%, as of course the rand erased earlier gains. Now, of course, a weaker rand was also a drag on retailers as well as food and drug sellers in the country. In Nigeria, the market is starting to slowly look up as of course we see crude oil market prices improving. Now, also coming up on today's show, Zimbabwe gears up for a new stock exchange, rallying investment from international banks. And we'll take a closer look at TikTok's newly signed deal with Oracle. And introduce you to a Tunisian startup that specializes in battery-powered prosthetics. Well, our starting point tonight is in Zimbabwe. Authorities are in talks with several international banks in a bid to secure investment for a new stock exchange. Now, Finance Minister Mthuli Ncube says the bourse will trade exclusively in foreign currency. The new exchange, called VFEX, will be opened in the coming weeks. Well, Farai Mwakutuya is in Harare with the details. Great to have you always on the show, Farai. Now, what we know so far is that this VFEX exchange will be a US dollar-denominated stock exchange. Besides this, Farai, what is the appeal for companies, both local and foreign, to list on this exchange? And certainly, what has been the response so far?
Well, Uche, just to, update in terms of that briefing where the finance minister gave that update on VFEX, it was also attended by representatives from investment houses that represent frontier markets. And they said that they were very interested and very keen to find out more details. They were very interested and keen in terms of a US dollar denominated stock exchange on the African continent. And I think because of the benefits that it has in terms of avoids the risks of exchange rate fluctuations. There's that certainty that is associated with it. One of the key concerns that they did raise, though, was the issue of settlement and the ability for investors to be able to get their dividends, their profits, their money out as and when they needed to, which is a challenge that was faced on the main Zimbabwe Stock Exchange a couple of years ago, if you remember, where investors, particularly foreign ones, had their funds stuck in the country and couldn't repatriate those dividends and those profits because of the challenges that were being faced on the currency front. Now, the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, VFEX, will be completely dollar denominated, and so the settlements will be in dollars. There's been that assurance given by the stock exchange as well as the finance minister, and that should give some comfort to those investors. Also in that briefing was a representative of an oil and gas company, a company that's exploring oil and gas in Zimbabwe. And the finance minister also pointed to the fact that mining houses are the sort of counters that they're looking to list very quickly on VFEX, because they need a lot of their capital expenditure is foreign currency, is required in foreign currency, and it's very difficult to raise that in terms of credit lines, particularly if you want to invest in Zimbabwe. But listing on a stock exchange, floating your shares, you might be able to get those investors with some excess cash to put that in, and that'll be a very attractive avenue for those sort of investors to participate. So there is interest, but it all hinges on whether or not the government will be able to be consistent in terms of policy, ensuring that as and when people need their money, their dividends, they can get them out and in US dollars.
Well, interesting you say that, Farai, because this new exchange is opening against a backdrop of an already struggling stock exchange. And by that, I mean the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, where, of course, investors are pretty much selling off due to low sentiment in the market, as well as other issues. What becomes of the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange in light of this new exchange? And certainly, what makes this VFEX exchange immune to similar challenges?
Well, Uche, I think you mentioned low sentiment. Apart from that, the stock exchange has also been hit by a number of delistings in the recent few years. So clearly, there are challenges on that front. But the finance minister says that they will continue as a government. This administration will continue to shore up the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, as the primary exchange that allows ordinary Zimbabweans to participate in the equity market as a way of deepening financial services, as a way of ensuring widening financial access and people to participate in terms of that exchange. So clearly it is very important. And he did say that, tax incentives in terms of lowering transaction fees and those sort of added benefits will be given to brokers, to investors on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange going forward as a way of ensuring that activity continues and people can continue to invest and participate on that stock exchange. It is crucially important to Zimbabwe in terms of it being a means for Zimbabweans to participate. But also, there are opportunities for companies that are listed on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange to benefit from the VFEX. They are allowed to invest up to 20% of the existing equity on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange on VFEX, provided that investment is in a different sector from the one that they are in. So there are also those incentives that are being provided to companies that are currently listed on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. So clearly it is not, there are efforts to make sure that the VFEX doesn't cannibalize, undermine in any way the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. It remains important, particularly as Zimbabwe is also trying to support, to back up the Zimbabwe dollar, its own currency. So going forward, we expect that there'll be a lot of incentives put in place to make sure that the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange remains competitive, that it gives returns that are competitive and widens the market for more people to participate in it.
Well, always great to have your insight, Farai. That's Farai Mwakutuya joining us there in Harare, Zimbabwe. Well, let's move on now to Nigeria. The country's foreign trade continues to experience a downward spiral in the quarter ending in June. That's the country's third consecutive decline since 2019. Now, the latest report from the Bureau of Statistics shows that Nigeria's foreign trade plunged 27% in the second quarter of this year, with the trade deficit rising to $16.1 billion. And as CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam reports, the decline has been fueled by supply chains disrupted by COVID-19 as well as border closures.
For nearly 6 months now, production at this honey factory in Nigeria's capital Abuja has stalled. Bee farmer Ademola Adeshino had spent over a decade producing and exporting honey and other byproducts to various parts of the world. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, he produced an average 150 tons of honey every year, mainly for exports. But now more than 80% of his earnings have been cut off.
We rear bees in the farm, and the lockdown has kept us indoors. We could not go to the farm. We have virtually not been able to do any export business throughout this year because of the lockdown.
Funds were lost. So if you begin to quantify it, in percentage-wise, I should say, so many people lost over 80-90% of what they would have gained this month. And then there were no serious stimulus packages from government to assist when these things happened.
Nigeria has continued to experience a major shortfall in trade. The country's Bureau of Statistics puts the latest plunge at 27%. Foreign trade dropped to $16.09 billion from $22.3 billion recorded in the second quarter of 2019. Exports, too, plummeted by 51.7% year-on-year to $6.1 billion, while imports declined by 14.6% to hit $11.1 billion year-on-year.
We know that industry in Nigeria is at the end of being totally out of existence, and yet the government is not looking at how to revamp in the industrial sector. We have the manufacturing sector that is gradually going into moribund. There is need to establish or to ensure that we have functional infrastructure to accommodate our industrial processes and growth. If we really want to compete globally and earn enough foreign exchange, promote exports, then we need to put in place infrastructure.
Trade deficit is feared to impact on the country's revenue, being largely an oil-dependent nation. The report also reveals that Nigeria's imports still outweighs its exports. This is despite the government's land border closure in 2019 to discourage importation. Experts warn that a continuous trend could result in depleting of the forex earnings, leading to a decline in its GDP, currency devaluation, high debt service, and low per capita income. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And on that note, let's look at our corporate headlines today. Telkom South Africa's mobile business has overtaken its competitor, Cell C, to become the country's third largest player in its mobile space. Now, according to the firm, a decline in fixed-line voice revenue was offset by growth in its cell phone business, both from a customer and revenue perspective. The firm added that it invested in modernizing its network, including a fiber overhaul. It has also agreed on a payment plan with the South African Revenue Service to pay outstanding taxes of nearly $52 million. Meanwhile, Nigerian breweries saw net profit fall 58% to its lowest in about 7 years in the first half of 2020. The company's profit was hit by a slowdown in sales during the COVID-19 pandemic and an overall decline in consumer purchasing power over the past 5 years. Now, analysts say despite the easing of lockdown measures, profits are likely to remain subdued for the rest of the year as the firm's costs continue to rise and consumers avoid large gatherings. Global gold mining firm AngloGold Ashanti says it has reinstated but trimmed its annual production targets, pointing to improved operating certainty. The firm says it now expects production of between 3.03 million and 3.10 million ounces. That is slightly lower than its February outlook of between 3.05 million and 3.30 million ounces. Now, the company benefited from its diversified global portfolio and careful management during the pandemic period. It is also anticipating the conclusion of the sale of its South African assets to Harmony Gold at the end of September. And finally, British multinational investment bank HSBC saw its share price fall to its lowest level since 1995 amidst allegations of money laundering. Now, according to leaked secret files, the bank allowed fraudsters to transfer $80 million around the world even after it had learned of their scam. Now, in Hong Kong, the shares fell by more than 4%. In London, they were down 6%. The share price falls come against a backdrop of broader negative sentiment on share markets. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a quick break now, still coming up on the show. Libya resumes oil production as well as exports. And Egypt's real estate sector takes a knock from COVID-19.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Sharia,
Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Well, let's head to North Africa now, where one of the continent's longest ongoing conflicts is still a major international concern. Libya is preparing to resume oil production, but concerns have been raised over who supervises its export and how to ensure that oil revenue will be divided equally amongst different factions. Well, CGTN's Tuli Shabalala has more.
Libya has high-priced light crude oil, and it has been a factor in its civil war. Rival forces split between East and West have been butting heads for control of oil revenues. Eastern tribes loyal to Commander Khalifa Haftar first seized control of key oil fields in January. A blockade has also prevented crude exports from leaving the country's ports. Haftar now says his forces will allow the Libyan oil facilities to resume operations and exports, but with conditions that ensure a fair distribution of revenue.
The decision was clear and very important, as it addressed all the demands of the Libyan people, which are fairness in distribution of revenues and not to waste oil resources on war.
Politicians in the country consider the move by Haftar as a way to find a comprehensive Libyan consensus.
All of the revenue coming from oil will be deposited in banks at the control of the entire Libyan people, so that it will be disposed of later. I mean by later, that we hope that there will be a single and unified Libyan government that looks after the interests of all Libyans.
Before the blockade, Libya produced 1.2 million barrels of oil a day. For the National Oil Corporation based in Tripoli, the suspension of oil exports has cost almost $10 billion in revenue, and it has led to nationwide fuel shortages. The resumption of oil production could help revive the economy and improve living conditions for citizens. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Meanwhile, Egypt's 5 biggest listed real estate firms have reported a combined profit fall of nearly 31% in the second quarter of this year, as property sales slowed down in the country due to the coronavirus-induced economic crisis. But the sector is still poised to recover by the end of 2020 or during the first half of next year. That's if Egypt can avoid a second wave of COVID-19 infections. From Cairo, here's Yasser Hakim with the details.
The real estate sector is one of the driving forces in Egypt's economy, as it employs millions of workers. Real estate attracts huge investments to the country, not just from local investors, but also from the foreign investors who mainly come from the Gulf countries, and who are attracted by its high return. However, the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic that hit Egypt in March has had its effects on the contractors.
If we're talking about small developers, they had the most losses and a good number of them closed down or merged in the first half of the year. The large developers saw a 30% drop in profits, which is very good in these circumstances. The medium-sized companies lost an average of 50%. The working from home concept has led to catastrophic losses in the segment of administrative and office unit sales. You can't underestimate this segment. It was flourishing and more profitable than residential units.
To protect this vital industry, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi allowed developers to resume operations before the lockdown was lifted. This is while the Central Bank of Egypt pumped billions of Egyptian pounds into the industry to keep it floating.
The state allocated a monthly salary to laborers who lost their jobs and income. This helped them survive the tough lockdown months. Banks were ordered to postpone all loan repayments on all construction companies for 6 months. This went a long way in helping many companies avoid bankruptcy.
Developers have had to come up with new sales facilities and marketing tools to survive the effects of the pandemic.
The 2 largest annual real estate fairs in the country were cancelled due to the coronavirus. The marketing team turned aggressively to social media as an alternative, using technology to develop online marketing strategies. The big developers offered up to 30% discounts for cash payments or longer repayment plan for installments. This hasn't pushed sales up much because in the midst of the COVID-19, most Egyptians don't want to spend. They prefer to wait a while.
Construction has steadily picked since the new measures were put in place, but the contraction in the industry still remains. This is despite the low number of daily coronavirus cases in Egypt currently being recorded. So how do experts view projections for the next period?
The virus hasn't disappeared, but the real estate will recover soon because it's viewed by Egyptian citizens as a safe investment. Many Egyptians don't buy units to live in them, but to invest because prices always go up. Despite all the crises in the past, unit prices have always increased at an average 10 to 15% per year.
The government is negotiating another emergency fund to support small contractors. But overall, most experts believe the building industry in Egypt will return to normality by mid-2021. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's stay in Egypt. The government is making every effort to reassure tourists about their safety in an effort to revive the sector. Since the country reopened back in July, hotels and resorts are operating below half their capacity. And of course, major sites remain virtually empty. The European Union is also yet to add Egypt to its safe travel list.
The pyramids of Giza in Egypt are one of the world's most recognizable tourist attractions. But today, they stand lonely, with just a handful of tourists walking among the ancient wonders.
This virus came about and ruined everything. There was tourism and things operating when things were good. After that, all has become what you now see. Total ruin.
Back in the day, we used to get many tourists. Numbers were quite high. We used to get Germans, Americans, Italians, Chinese, and Japanese, English. Now none of those come here.
That could be bad news for the economy. Tourism accounts for up to 15% of Egypt's national output. Officials said it was losing around $1 billion each month after the sector all but shut down from March as the coronavirus pandemic struck. Egypt has now resumed international flights and reopened tourist spots. Officials say tourist sites and hotels are subject to strict controls.
I really think that we cannot sit and wait until this virus will be completely finished. But you can come and you can be protected because you can enjoy the magic and you touch the pyramid and you follow the mummies coming from Cairo Museum to go to the Civilization Museum.
And we started looking for countries where we could stop. And there were all of the countries were almost closed. And we saw that Egypt opened on August. So we were very happy.
But even so, officials, hotel owners and tour guides concede that the key winter season starting in October is going to be tough. The state has moved to protect the sector with emergency funding. More than 9,000 registered tour guides will receive $32 monthly till the end of the year. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
And let's turn our attention now to the Sahel region. It is the largely semi-arid region that cuts across several African nations, is on the front line of climate change effects. Now, experts say its extreme vulnerability to drought and shifting rainfall patterns is ratcheting up problems of poverty, population pressure, and of course, jihadist violence. The UN also warns that millions of people are in a state of acute food insecurity.
Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, global temperatures have been rising. That's according to a United Nations report in September. But this average warming is said to be 50% greater in the Sahel. The region has suffered a combination of droughts and floods. In Mauritania, these extreme events are having far-reaching consequences.
The roads were flooded. There are no more taxis. People are no longer able to reach their workplace. We are there, sitting doing nothing.
Here, look at the water. This is the water that came to our door and entered our room. The state must find a solution to the water. This year, a lot of water has fallen here.
These climate conditions have sparked a massive rural exodus. Jihadist groups have been taking advantage of this to enlarge their areas of influence. Food insecurity is also set to intensify. The UN has warned that agricultural yields will continue to fall in some parts of the region. Surging population growth in the western countries of the Sahel may turn an already bad situation even worse. Despite these challenges, experts say the future of the Sahel looks promising. People in the Sahel have taken matters into their own hands. Tens of thousands of farmers and fishermen have enhanced their resilience to climate change. In February this year, 17 Sahel countries set down a plan to invest $400 billion in fighting climate change by 2030. Part of the plan is investing in projects to limit greenhouse gas emissions and help adaptation to climate change. Cham Hono, CGTN.
Well, on that note, let's take a short break, but still to come. We'll take a closer look at TikTok's newly signed deal with Oracle. And Iran slams the US on its move to reimpose UN sanctions.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
and holding guns. Machine guns from police forces towards the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Just about 1:30, let's recap today's top headlines. Libya has announced plans to resume oil production, but this has raised concerns over who supervises its export and how to ensure oil revenue will be divided equally amongst different factions. Well, Khalifa Haftar now says his forces will allow Libyan oil facilities to resume operations, but with assurance of a distribution of revenue. And Ethiopia has charged its prominent opposition leader, Jawar Mohammed, with terrorism and instigating violence. Mohammed is amongst 24 people facing criminal charges. Now, if found guilty, the accused could end up serving life imprisonment sentences. And the United Nations General Assembly is underway at the UN headquarters in New York. The 75th session comes amid a range of global challenges, including the COVID-19 pandemic. Heads of state and government are addressing this session via video, a first in the UN's history. The event is aimed at reaffirming the global commitment to multilateralism. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Well, let's get some international news now. A U.S. federal judge has blocked the U.S. government's ban on WeChat, citing free speech in her ruling. Now, the popular Chinese-owned messaging and e-commerce app was scheduled to stop operating in the U.S. on Sunday. This reprieve comes just after TikTok announced a deal with American companies on its U.S. operations. Here's Toby Muse reporting.
Judge Laurel Beeler said a lawsuit launched by a collective of WeChat users could have merit, especially in terms of possible restrictions on freedom of speech and also claims of hardship to users of the app. This order by the judge also prevents the government from restricting infrastructure companies from carrying WeChat's internet traffic. The ban was supposed to go into effect Sunday. Officials from the US Commerce Department had said in a call to reporters earlier this week that they anticipated a long legal fight to try to curb WeChat's presence here in the United States. The app TikTok had also been slated to be banned from being downloaded in the United States until the surprise deal announced Saturday. As part of the new deal, software giant Oracle, TikTok and Walmart will create something called TikTok Global, which will be based in the United States. Oracle will look after all of US user data and safeguard TikTok's computer systems. The two US companies will hold a 20% stake in TikTok Global. ByteDance will hold the remaining 80%. In announcing the deal, President Donald Trump said that his previous concerns over security of the app had been reassured now that TikTok Global will be based in the United States.
All of the technology will be maintained here. They're going to move into the United States, which is what's important. They're going to move it to the United States. Unbelievable company. They're going to have 25,000 jobs. If it all goes, I gave them the preliminary approval.
To give an idea of just how chaotic these last-minute negotiations have been, as part of the deal, TikTok Global will make a $5 billion donation to an education fund. TikTok said on Sunday that the first it heard about this donation was from news reports of the deal. Still, in a statement, TikTok said it was looking forward to investing in educational projects across the world. Toby Muse reporting for CGTN, Arlington, Virginia.
Well, let's now get the latest on that TikTok deal and, of course, WeChat's operations in the U.S. We're joined now by Jim Spellman in Washington, D.C. Great to have you with us, Jim. Now, of course, President Trump says he has approved a deal in concept. Walmart has now tentatively agreed to purchase a 7.5% stake in TikTok. Oracle says it will become a minority investor, and of course its cloud provider. Is this deal looking like a sure thing?
It's looking like anything but a sure thing. Just within the last few hours, President Trump threatening to pull his support for the deal, and here's why. Earlier on Monday, TikTok's parent company ByteDance released a statement saying that they would retain 80% control of this new entity, TikTok Global. That goes against what had been previously reported mere hours earlier. Adding to the confusion, Oracle then contradicted ByteDance and said ByteDance would have no control over the U.S. entity. So it's not clear where this deal stands. But President Trump said unless Oracle has 100% control over this company, he may pull his support. So there's a long way to go before President Trump signs off on this deal, and Beijing would also have to sign off on a final version of any deal. Back to you.
Well, on that note, will they be able then to meet the U.S. Department of Commerce's Sunday deadline?
Well, the Sunday deadline is really arbitrary. You know, it was set for the previous Sunday, yesterday, here in the United States, and then the Trump administration moved it back a week as it seemed that they were making progress on the deal. So I think it's entirely possible that they could extend it. Again, a lot of this is about domestic politics. So you have this Sunday deadline, but if really U.S. users were no longer able to download this app and they were no longer able to receive updates and the user experience were to deteriorate, there would be huge political blowback on President Trump here in the United States. About 100 million people in the U.S. use TikTok on a regular basis. That would be a huge interference if suddenly they were to look at their phone and not be able to use their favorite app. Back to you.
Well, regarding WeChat, we know a judge was able to put on hold a ban on the app WeChat in the U.S. this weekend. So how will this move now impact on President Trump's plan to ban WeChat going forward?
So WeChat is sort of a different case. There's 12 to maybe 19 million users in the United States. Almost all of them have some connection to China. People use it either to chat with their friends and family back in China, or they have some sort of business or university type relationship with entities in China. So President Trump feels like there's little political blowback for going after WeChat. So even though the court put a hold on President Trump's administration's plan to block fresh downloads and limit some of the functionality of WeChat, they feel that they will be able to ultimately prevail. They've already filed a complaint against the court's order, and though they admit it could take weeks or even months, they think that ultimately they will be able to ban WeChat on similar security grounds that they are using to fight TikTok as well. A lot of this comes down as well to the U.S. election in November. President Trump wants to be able to go into the final days of the election saying he's following through on his promises to be tough on China. Back to you.
Well, we are certainly watching that closely. Many thanks for that update, Jim. That's Jim Spellman joining us there in Washington, D.C. Well, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says that the U.S. will face defeat in its move to reimpose UN sanctions on the country. This comes as European allies call the unilateral declaration legally void. In a televised speech, Rouhani added that Iran would give a crushing response to America's bullying. The Trump administration earlier said the measures were being reimposed under the mechanism of a nuclear deal that the U.S. had quit.
The reaction from the Iranian officials has been dominated by the idea of what they call U.S. isolation. President Rouhani has been celebrating the fact that the maximum pressure policy has boomeranged on America's face to become the U.S. maximum isolation. He's also warning of a decisive response to U.S. bullying. And elsewhere, Foreign Minister Zarif attacked his U.S. counterpart Mike Pompeo as a lying mythomaniac. We do understand that Zarif has been in relentless diplomacy with Europeans to neutralize the U.S. attempt. But those Europeans have been loud and clear also against Iran's breaches, including a resumption of uranium enrichment and an augmented stockpile beyond the Accord's limits, which of course Tehran has justified as a response to their failure in bringing the economic relief. The strategy ahead, shared by Iran and the remaining signatories, seems to be an attempt to drag the deal up until the U.S. voting day. That's when a Trump re-election may either kill the agreement or lead to renegotiating it. Or we could see also Biden's name coming out of the ballot box that may bring a sigh of relief as he has promised to reinstate the JCPOA. But political statements aside, when you talk to members of the Iranian public, those bearing the brunt of years-long sanctions, there is pretty much nail-biting. They would refer you to the time when President Trump walked away from the nuclear deal. What happened in practice was a mass exodus of European firms who were scared away by U.S. penalties. The very same fact that people are falling victim, especially due to the ban on life-saving medicines, has also been repeatedly used by Iranian officials, who only last week raised it with the International Court of Justice at The Hague. We do know that U.S. sanctions have almost zeroed out Iran's lifeline oil exports, and this has been translated into soaring prices and a sharp nosedive in the national currency's value. Even today, the Iranian rial posted yet another plummeting trend of around 2.5% in only one day to show its immediate reaction to the renewed sanctions. And when it comes to how the pressure policy is actually working, those ordinary Iranians are obviously the ones who continue to see their purchasing power shrink and their savings collapse right before their eyes on a daily basis. Sarbas Nazari for CGTN in Tehran.
Well, let's do a full 360 now and turn our attention to the ongoing London Fashion Week, where Turkish designer Bora Aksu is revealing his latest collection inspired by the coronavirus pandemic. Also hitting the runway, an array of neon colors and stripes from a designer called Mark Fast, who took inspiration from remembering those times he felt most free.
A very different event. Nearly 50 fashion shows took place during last September's London Fashion Week. But COVID-19 means Aksu's fashion show is one of only 4 this year. The designer said that after such an isolating period earlier this year due to the pandemic, he felt a bit sad not having a traditional show.
And for me to create something digital, which is kind of also really nice, but almost like cutting off that human touch, and I really couldn't do it.
COVID-19 has made him think of the 1918 flu pandemic and the accompanying time of mourning at the end of World War I. Aksu said he wanted to send a message of hope by reminding people that after World War I and the Spanish flu, the 1920s was a time of growth and happiness for many.
There was like a time of grieving, and then there was a time of rebirth and abundance. And this all happened in like a 3 years' time. And the collection based on all these 3 sections. So it started from that sort of like this kind of sad and dull times, going into a grieving time, and then going into the abundance time.
Meanwhile, an array of neon colors and stripes hit the runway last Friday, thanks to designer Mark Fast. He said he took his inspiration for his Spring-Summer 2020 collection from raving back in the day. Some models wore stone-washed 80s-inspired denim with jumpers, while others had on stripy outfits layered with jackets.
And I wanted to bring that nostalgia back, the good times, and yeah, the music, the tracks that we played sort of showed that.
Despite the fewer attendees and events at this year's London Fashion Week, Fast said the industry is still looking forward.
I think so. I think people are dying to be inspired and see what the next trend is, what the pandemic has inspired people to do. I think it's quite a new era. So what does that mean? We'll see.
London Fashion Week runs until September 22nd. Shen Li, CGTN.
Now in Germany, innkeepers in the city of Munich have tapped their barrels for revelers who are determined to make the most of a scaled-down Oktoberfest. That's after the world's biggest beer festival was cancelled due to the coronavirus pandemic.
3, 2, 1, 12 Uhr.
This special brew started flowing from midday at 54 pubs, with locals in traditional lederhosen and dirndls sitting at spread-out tables and, where possible, outdoors.
It's not really the same, but we've been Oktoberfest regulars for years. We said we have come here today, but we're missing the festival a lot.
It is a far cry from the regular 6 million visitors from all over the world who flock to the Bavarian capital to squeeze into the tents for a beer feast. More than 7 million liters of beer are reported to be consumed every year during the event.
It's no replacement, but at least an alternative and a chance to meet and go out with a small group of people. It's more than nothing. It's the best one can do during coronavirus times.
The first Oktoberfest was held in 1810 in honor of the marriage of Bavarian Crown Prince Ludwig to Princess Therese of Saxony-Hildburghausen. The event has come a long way since then. It typically brings Munich some 1.2 billion euros in annual revenue, but not this year. Still, it seems nothing can stop beer enthusiasts from hitting the pubs and sun-drenched gardens to keep up with tradition. CGTN.
And on that note, let's look at commodity markets today. Oil prices declining as Libya signals plans to resume crude exports. Also, surging coronavirus cases clouded the outlook for demand and, of course, weighed on risky assets today. Libya is moving closer to reopening its battered oil industry after it told companies to resume production at some fields. This, of course, will add to already rising supply from OPEC plus nations. Meanwhile, gold prices edging higher today. They were helped by a softer dollar, while investors are looking forward to speeches by the U.S. Fed, of course, due this week, for further clues on the U.S. central bank's approach to inflation going forward. Let's take a quick break now. Still to come on the show. We'll introduce you to a Tunisian startup that specializes in life-saving prosthetics.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Aden, Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, a Tunisian startup has been praised for its role in developing affordable bionic artificial limbs by tapping into technology. Since launching in 2018, Cure Bionics has been working on a product that has evolved from a mechanical prosthetic solution into a battery-powered and bionic one that can, of course, be 3D printed. CGTN's Enan Chaushi takes a closer look at the startup that is creating life-saving prosthetic limbs for those in need.
27 years old, Mohammed Dawafi is the founder and CEO of Cure Bionics, a startup that develops and manufactures bionic hands and arms for people with disabilities. The electronics and embedded systems engineer from the prestigious École Nationale d'Ingénieurs de Sousse and his team are trying to change the lives of thousands of disabled and handicapped people in the North African country.
My startup Cure Bionics is empowering people with disabilities, focusing currently on people with limb differences, people who were born with no hands or got amputations. So we are empowering them with 3D printed bionic arms, also with physical rehabilitation solutions using virtual reality, gamification.
Cure Bionics offers many products and services at an affordable price to help thousands who are in need of the artificial limbs. The startup targets to win over the prosthetics market by offering competitive prices in both the domestic and international markets, where millions of people are in need of the life-changing products.
Starting from the price, it will be very competitive. We are talking about 1/3 or 1/4 of the cheapest one in the market. We are also talking about features that are empowering, like the customization of the prosthetic. Actually, the users will have the ability to customize their prosthetics using external covers that can be continuously changeable.
Many talented interns and engineers have joined the adventure. Despite its limited financial resources and the daily technical challenges, this vibrant group is focused on innovation and scientific research.
The idea behind being a young engineer working for a cause, it all starts from a challenging ourselves at the first place, like believing in ourselves to do everything, and challenging the difficulties that everyone, and as youngs or people did not find jobs or whatever, make the challenge to make your own job, your own comfort zone, your own everything. Like challenge the existence, the problems, and make it to yourself.
According to the startup founder, who has also been recently featured in the Forbes Middle East 30 and the 30 2020 edition, the idea behind the launch of Cure Bionics is closely linked to the noble cause of serving people with disabilities and facilitating their lives. The initiative shows the importance of technology in achieving life goals for disabled people. Mohammed and his team plan to conquer the North African market and to internationalize by selling their made-in-Tunisia products globally. The Tunisian startup, which was founded at the National School of Engineers of Sousse, will soon open a new research center at the Technopole of Sousse. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, before we leave you, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand slipping today as, of course, rising COVID-19 cases sparked a risk of sentiment in the market. We saw the rand erase all earlier gains, dropping about 1.8% on the back of a resurgence of the virus in some regions. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, the naira has finally begun to strengthen on the black market. It stands at 445 naira per dollar, and that's after closing at 460 naira per dollar on Friday. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.